Omega-3s. I got a lot of questions about this, you guys. I've been talking about polyunsaturated fats a lot, and mostly when I talk about polyunsaturated fats, I am talking about linoleic acid, an 18-carbon omega-6 polyunsaturated fat. But people always ask me, what about omega-3s? We've heard tons of good things about omega-3s. It's important to clarify that both omega-6 fatty acids, which include linoleic acid and arachidonic acid, and omega-3 fatty acids, which include alpha-linolenic acid, alpha-linolenic acid, EPA, which is eicosapentaenoic acid, docosahexaenoic acid, DHA, and DPA, docosapentaenoic acid, are all, both omega-3 and omega-6 are considered essential for humans. We can't make polyunsaturated fats, but we don't need nearly the amount of these that we have in our diet in 2020. And I think that for most of us, we are getting too much linoleic acid. I've talked about this in previous videos. Please refer to those in my podcast. You can find all of those at the Heart and Soil website, heartandsoilsupplements.com. All my podcasts, all my previous videos are listed there. But there are way too many omega-6 polyunsaturated fats in our diet, lots of linoleic acid. I also think that we don't need to go out of our way to get lots and lots of omega-3. And if you really look at the literature, there's not a whole lot of benefits to excess omega-3. In fact, there are many harms to excess omega-3. What the heck is he talking about? How can there be harms to omega-3? That's what I'm going to show you in this video. All of the polyunsaturated fats, whether it's omega-3 or omega-6, which has to do with the number of carbons from the non-carbonyl end of the fatty acid molecule at which you find the first double bond. I'll show you guys some pictures so you can see what I'm talking about here. That is how you name the fats. So just to review this briefly for you guys, again, if you're listening on the podcast, you might want to go to YouTube or Instagram to see these photos. This is eicosapentaenoic acid. It's a 20 carbon. Every one of these branch points here is a carbon. It's a 20 carbon omega-3 fatty acid, meaning 3 carbons from the end of the molecule is where you find the first double bond. Here's linoleic acid. It's an 18 carbon omega-6. 6 carbons from the end of the molecule is where you find the double bond. I get a lot of questions also about conjugated linoleic acid. Very different looking molecule. This is linoleic acid. When the molecule is depicted like this and is straight, these hydrogens are actually on the same side of the molecule. If you look at the name here of linoleic acid, it's actually a cis 912 octadecanoic acid. What does all that mean, Paul? It's crazy. You're confusing us. It means that when you're looking at trans versus cis, the hydrogens are on the same side of the opposing carbons, and that is why they are considered to be cis. Trans is when they are on opposite sides of the carbon, and when you have a trans molecule, you have a bend in the molecule. So I will show you, in contrast to linoleic acid, this is what conjugated linoleic acid looks like. Again, it's an 18 carbon omega-6, but it has a bend in the molecule because the carbons here, the hydrogens here are actually cis on a couple of these carbons. Now, have we been told trans fats are bad for us? Yes. Is CLA bad for us? No. It's a naturally occurring form of a trans fat. There are bad fats that are trans and relatively good fats that are trans. This is a cis-9 trans-11 conjugated linoleic acid, which is rumenic acid. It is different from the canonical example of 18 carbon omega-6 linoleic acid, okay, which is a cis-912 conjugated linoleic acid. This one, at least, the rumenic acid, is a cis-9 trans-11, and they have different sort of signaling molecules in the human body at some level. But what am I talking about in general in this little mini podcast, this video on Instagram, which nobody watches anymore because all you want to see is me do stupid stuff on TikTok? Okay, I'm talking about omega-3 fatty acids and why they're harmful for humans. So check out this, in excess at least. Check out this article. And we're going to go through a lot in this one today. So let's just start with this. Lipid peroxidation during N3 fatty acid and vitamin E supplementation in humans. I've talked about this one before. This is an article showing that when you oversupplement omega-3s, you get lipid peroxidation. That's a bad thing. You do not want to see increases in lipid peroxidation. The results demonstrate that supplementing the diet with N3 fatty acids, omega-3 fatty acids, resulted in an increase in lipid peroxidation as measured by plasma MDA malondialdehyde release and lipid peroxide products, which was not suppressed by vitamin E supplementation. You do not want to supplement your diet with omega-3s in excess. If you're getting omega-3s from fish, fine. I wouldn't overconsume fish because it's pretty high in heavy metals, but if you're getting omega-3s from fish, that's fine. Don't take a fish oil for a lot of the reasons that I'm going to talk about right now. So if we look at this next article, which is very fascinating, you will see that there is pretty good evidence that in these fish oil supplements, you have a real problem with peroxidation. And I'm going to explain what peroxidation is in a moment as well. So in this article, determination of lipid oxidation products in vegetable oils and marine omega-3 supplements. Very interesting. What you find is that the contents of hydroperoxides and alkenols, which I'm going to explain in a moment, in omega-3 supplements are higher than in vegetable oils. After heating vegetable oils, a large increase in alkenol concentration was observed. So you don't want to see any of these products of peroxidation, of oxidation, but the concentration of alkenols was actually higher in the omega-3s in these fish oil supplements. As I showed earlier, fish oil supplements are polyunsaturated fats that are omega-3. They actually have more double bonds than the number of double bonds found in linoleic acid. And there's pretty compelling evidence that the double bond index, the number of double bonds found in an unsaturated molecule, in a polyunsaturated fat, will correlate with metabolic problems, will correlate with fat gain, because it keeps those adipocytes open to the deposition or the ingress of energy substrate, glucose and triglycerides, making the adipocytes, the fat cells, grow. And we see that. I'm going to show you that in mice and rats as well. But before I do that, and in humans, like I did last time. So if you guys saw the last video, you saw me talk about the Chinese study in which they gave people diets that were high and low, medium, and high in soybean oil. And the people that had the highest amount of soybean oil in their diet lost the least weight. All of the diets in that study appeared to be hypocaloric. They didn't give people the right amount of calories, but the people who had less soybean oil lost more weight and they had more saturated fat in their diet. So these polyunsaturated fats appear to cause our fat cells to grow or retain weight. I want to do a little organic chemistry lesson for you guys so this all makes sense. If you don't like organic chemistry, close your ears and your eyes. You are not going to like this one bit, but I think it's fascinating. So if you think about that term alkenol that I talked about from that paper, they are alpha beta unsaturated carbonyl compounds. This is the carbonyl group, the oxygen double bonded to a carbon, and you have an alpha and a beta carbon here. This unsaturation is the double bond. That is why molecules are called polyunsaturated or monounsaturated, the number of double bonds between the carbons. So this is an alpha beta unsaturated carbonyl is an alkenol. Now, the problem with alkenols is that they're very susceptible to peroxidation, to reactions which make them damaging to our body. Hydroperoxides are the other thing that was talked about in that last article with the omega-3 fatty acids in fish, and they are shown here. It is an R group, which is an organic molecule composed of a variety of carbons. OOH, ROOH is a peroxide or a hydroperoxide molecule. So you don't want these to happen in fish oil supplements, and they're pretty high in fish oil supplements when they're checked because these are very unstable molecules. Let's go back to EPA, eicosapentaenoic acid. Look at all the double bonds here, you guys. There's a double bond here, 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 here. There's 5 double bonds. There's 5 double bonds. So this is a real problem. There's double bonds at 5, 8, 11, 14, and 17 carbons. That's going to cause a lot of places where you can form these alpha beta unsaturated carbonyls, these hydroperoxides. And so why is this a problem? Because this leads to lipid peroxidation. Here's an unsaturated lipid right here. That looks a lot like something that you could see on maybe a molecule like linoleic acid or eicosapentaenoic acid. And it has a double bond. And if the double bond comes into contact with this hydroxyl radical, you get this lipid radical. The lipid radical undergoes propagation and you get this lipid peroxyl radical and you get a lipid peroxide. This is exactly what I showed you guys in the previous slide. You have an R group, which is the whole molecule here, and the OOH. This is a hydroperoxide, a lipid peroxide. It is a very reactive molecule. It can do this lipid peroxidation reaction. This is what we don't want to happen. This is what we think is probably happening when things like these lipids get oxidized in our LDL molecules. Why does it happen? Because we're packing them full of way too many polyunsaturated fats. We are forming alkenols, we're forming alpha beta unsaturated ketones, and we are forming hydroperoxides like I showed you there. So that's a bad thing. You don't want to oversupplement with omega-3s. They are not entirely benign. Ron Patrick. Okay, so I want to show you guys some studies in mice that make this pretty clear. If you've been listening to the things I've been saying, I've been reading a lot of Peter from Hyperlipid's blog, hat tip to him, and he's going to come on my podcast soon. I've got Brad Marshall coming on the podcast soon. We've actually already recorded that. It's going to be out in a few weeks. We're super excited to release Firestarter at Heart and Soil because it's got the stearic acid. Brad and I talked lots about that. You guys have heard me talk about stearic acid as the flip side to linoleic acid potentially as well. So lots of cool stuff coming from Heart and Soil in addition to what we've got now, the beef organs and the bone marrow and liver. Nevertheless, the idea with this concept, with this paradigm, is that the more unsaturations you have in a lipid molecule, the more it is going to signal your adipocytes, whether they be visceral or subcutaneous, to remain open to growing. And that's not a good thing. You don't want your adipocytes to grow. And so, as I showed you guys last time in the Chinese study, when you have more polyunsaturated fats with soybean oil, you lose less weight. If those people had been on isocaloric diets relative to their previous diet, they would have gained more weight. Now, we see this also in mice, and there are some really striking studies to show this. And this biology is conserved between species, because as you'll hear me talk about in the podcast with Brad, this is the mitochondrial electron transport chain. This is conserved all the way down to C. elegans. Mice studies are probably pretty relevant here, and we do see this mirrored a lot of times in humans. Pretty interesting study. This one was actually looking at the long-term effects of dietary fat supplementation on tissue composition and lifespan. They didn't find any differences in lifespan. What they did find was when they gave the mice more polyunsaturated fats as omega-3s versus omega-6s, you can see the graph of the weights here. Now, this is actually a pretty hard graph to read, so I'm going to borrow this from Peter at Hyperlipid and show you exactly what this looks like, and it'll be much simpler to see what we are talking about here. So this is the same graphic, and you can see we have this line. Peter's drawn these lines for us. The red line is omega-3s. That's the top line. They got the fattest. The bottom line, the middle line is omega-6s, and the bottom line is more saturated fats. So which group gets the fattest? The omega-3s. Which group gets intermediate? Omega-6s. Which group gets the least fat? Saturated fat. You can't say that omega-3s are benign. My fear here is that omega-3s are going to cause us to gain weight just like omega-6s. Now, at a metabolic level, the omega-3s probably have a different effect, and that's been shown. But in terms of an adipocyte gaining perspective, they're just as bad, I think. And that would make sense if you think about the way that this is happening at the level of the mitochondria. This is, again, the original graphic. I showed you the other lines. It's much easier to see the omega-3 versus the omega-6 and the control group, which is high saturated fat, in the other thing I looked at. You can see the ratios of all of them here if you want to see how much they were fed. And then interestingly, you can see later on in the paper the glucose values as well. And it's quite striking what happened. Basically, the take home there is omega-3 makes you just as fat as omega-6. In fact, a lot of times in these mice, it made you fatter. That's not a good thing. We don't want adipocytes to expand this much. So one more paper, dietary fatty acids and oxidative stress in heart mitochondria. And the cardiac mitochondria from rats fed with coconut oil showed the lowest concentration of oxidized and peroxidized. We talked about what that means earlier. Lipids. The fish oil diet leads to the highest oxidative stress in cardiac mitochondria, an effect that could be partially prevented by the antioxidant probucol. But as you will see with probucol, the mice got really fat, the fattest of all. So in this study, they show you what they're doing here in terms of the diets, and then they actually show you the weights of these mice. And if you look here, you can see the final body weight of the fish oil group is definitely the highest. Now, these weights are not large enough to have a statistically significant difference between these if you run the numbers, but there's a clear trend here. Coconut oil, olive oil fish oil plus antioxidant is the fattest. If you've listened to the other things I've talked about, you know that reactive oxygen species generated in the, let's say, metabolism, the oxidation of saturated fat, are what tells our mitochondria to shut off signaling at the level of the fat cell and allows those fat cells to stop growing. If that doesn't make sense to you, you can go back and listen to the previous videos I've done if all this is interesting. If it's not interesting, you can just go watch me on TikTok or over at Heart and Soil if I'm steak dancing over there, if that's more your style. But you can find here that you can see the graphics here in terms of all the other metrics they looked at, but here's the MDA. This is the malondialdehyde. This is one of these products of oxidation. Coconut oil, olive oil, fish oil is the most. Fish oil is oxidizing the most in the heart mitochondria. Do you want your heart mitochondria to have all these products of oxidation? I don't. I don't think this is a very good idea. I don't think massive supplementation with omega-3s is good. I've shown you guys that now in multiple studies, both the studies in humans and the studies in mice and rats showing weight gain and those peroxidation products that we reviewed in our little cheeky organic chemistry lesson on a Saturday night in Austin, Texas. And that is not a good thing. The last thing I want to leave you guys with is this. I don't do fish in my diet right now. It's just too high in mercury, too high in heavy metals. I actually haven't been eating a lot of eggs recently because I think they're probably seasonal and I wanted to do an experiment. I wanted to do a very low linoleic acid experiment and a very high stearic acid experiment. So I recently got a bunch of labs because you all know that I love to do blood work and I'm not someone that just spouts off about theories without testing it, at least on myself. This is a test tube that I can use. I'm going to show you guys what I found. I'm going to do a whole podcast about my whole blood work analysis, but I want to show you the fatty acid analysis that I just got back from Genova. It's really fascinating. These are my fatty acids. That's my name, Paul Saladino. They should put Carnivore MD up there. Pro of TikTok. Essential and metabolic fatty acid markers. This is in red blood cells. First, let's look over here at linoleic acid. My linoleic acid is very low. It's below the reference range, but believe me, I'm just fine. I have plenty of linoleic acid. And then I want to go down and show you my stearic acid. Look at that. Super high. That means I'm eating a lot of stearic acid tallow. When Firestarter comes in, I'll be doing the Firestarter. It's amazing. Stearic acid is high. Linoleic acid is low. Guess what? I got a six-pack. This is the way to do it, you guys. Not just saying my example. It works in a lot of other cases. As you heard me talk about in the last video, when Brad Marshall did this with one of the people he was talking to, you had the same effect. Lower linoleic acid, however you got to do it. If you have to get rid of corn and soy fed pork and chicken fat, you got to do it. That's just how it goes. It's not really arguable. Is it going to be the major thing for most people? Probably not, but it's something to consider because it'll help get you to the ideal. And then you want to maximize stearic acid with animal fat. Now look up here. I don't supplement with omega-3s. My EPA is like almost off the chart and I have lots of DPA and lots of docosahexaenoic acid. I have tons of omega-3s and I don't supplement with omega-3s. The only fat that I'm eating right now is grass-fed suet from White Oak and Belcampo. I have plenty of omega-3s, you guys. Super interesting. Stearic acid, you can see my other saturated fats. They're all high because I'm eating lots of fat from these grass-fed ruminants. But I wanted to show you my actual fat numbers there and show you that you don't need omega-3s from a fish oil supplement to get plenty of omega-3. This is a great ratio and there's a robust amount of omega-3s in my red blood cells and my linoleic acid is very low. Now, I'll show you guys in the podcast later what I do on my blood work. Lipid peroxides are low. 8-hydroxy-2-deoxyguanosine, which is a marker of DNA damage, is low in me as well. So that is hopefully helpful with regard to omega-3s. You need some, just like you need some omega-6, but you don't need a ton. I think we've been told to supplement these over and over and over, and that is something I disagree with. You don't need to supplement omega-3s if you are getting real food. Does the average American who's eating a standard American diet need omega-3s? It might help, but if you're eating grass-fed ruminant fat, you don't need to supplement omega-3s. You definitely should not be taking a fish oil supplement, in my humble opinion. And if you are, you better check your malondialdehyde, your thiobarbituric acid reactive substances, your lipid peroxides, and your 8-hydroxy-2-deoxyguanosine, because you want to know how many of those hydroperoxides and alkenols you have. And if you're taking a fish oil supplement, you might ask for their certificate of analysis to look at how many peroxidation products are in there. I don't think humans should be taking peroxidated, already oxidized lipids. You're putting extra oxidative stress in your body. And I think you're signaling to your fat cells that it's okay to keep growing, not what you want to happen. So yes, omega-3 is helpful. No, you don't need to supplement. No excess is not good. It's a bad idea. Don't overdo it with any of the PUFAs. There's a difference between omega-6 and omega-3. You're going to get plenty of both. You're going to get plenty of omega-3, especially just eating grass-fed ruminant fat. So hopefully that is helpful. If you guys need more nose to tail nutrition in your life, check us out, Heart and Soil. We're always there for you. You can always email me, Dr. Paul, drpaul@heartandsoilsupplements.com if you have questions. I got lots of good podcasts coming out. I love you all. Stay radical. Send this video to your friends. If you got questions about omega-3s or omega-6s, go back and listen to the other videos in this series if you have more questions. It's always evolving. It's complex stuff. Lots more good content coming. Stay radical, you guys.